Hey guys, thanks for watching my channel today. I was daydreaming a little bit today. One of those rainy days where I couldn't get out and really do any fishing. And while I was daydreaming, I kind of went back in time and I was thinking about some things, and I realized I caught more bass 60 to 65 years ago on just three different fishing lures than I catch today with hundreds of lures to pick from. 65 years ago, I would have been 12 years old. My entire bass arsenal would rattle around in one corner of a little metal tackle box. There were three lures. That was it. And an old bottle of Uncle Josh pork. And in that bottle, in the brine, I had a couple pieces of pork chunk and a couple pieces of, I think one was a black eel and one was a white bass strip. I kept them all together in one bottle. I'm not really sure where I got the different pieces, but I remember I only had one bottle. And, these lures were my treasure. They were, as a matter of fact, I actually traded one of my buddies an entire stack of Superman comic books for the Arbogast Jitterbug because I wanted one so badly. My dad had a couple, and when we'd go fishing together, he'd let me use one of his. But it was important to me to have my own. And even at 12 or 13 years old, I was still one of those guys that had to have my own stuff. But anyway, those lures were not only my treasure, they were all I had when it came to fishing. And at the top of the list was that black jitterbug. It was the kind that gurgled across the surface at dusk, just like it owned the lake. The second lure on my top three was a shiny Johnson silver minnow. It was the spoon that would slide through lily pads and hydrilla like it had a set of keys to the kingdom. And third, the one most folks today have never even heard of, was a Johnny O'Neill weed wing. A strange looking little contraption, kind of a Johnson spoon with a propeller. And it came through the weeds clean and just flat out caught fish. Three lures. And I caught more bass back then than I do today, with more lure options than I could ever begin to count. Now think about it. No electronics, no forward-facing sonar, no 12 rods on the deck, no color charts that look like a paint catalog, no electric motor, no depth finder, no power pole. Matter of fact, I rowed the boat, or my brother rowed it. All I had were those three lures and a little pork. And you know what that forced me to do? Forced me to learn. I learned how that jitterbug sounded when a bass was tracking it. I learned to let it sit and wait for the rings to disappear. That was hard because I wanted to keep moving that bait because I loved the way it went through the water. I learned the difference between a rock bass bumping it and a bass rolling underneath. I learned that if I slowed it down just enough at dark, something big was about to happen. Sometimes the weight was just too much to take. And the Johnson spoon, well, I used a white bass strip as a trailer. I only had one, so after each trip, I'd have to put it back in the bottle and reuse it on the next trip. And if you've ever taken a piece of pork off of a hook, getting it off that barb can be really challenging. But I'd save it for the next trip. I learned how to let it flutter and go straight down in a hole in the weeds in the pads. I learned how to rip it free from grass without fouling it. I learned how to feel that tick when a bass inhaled it on the fall. And it was a powerful bait just reeling it in. I'd often follow it in the clear water and marvel at the incredible action of the spoon and the pork. Often I'd see bass following it, and all I had to do was stop, let it fall, and they always grabbed it. And last but not least, the Johnny O'Neill weed wing. I learned confidence using this lure. Of all the baits you could always expect a bait to get a strike from, this was it. No matter how fast you retrieved it, I never fully understood why a bass would follow and strike it, since I'd never seen a bait fish or a frog move that quickly across the surface of the water. But it did something. It somehow provoked a bass like no other lure. Unfortunately, they missed it a lot. And a lot of times, if you just let it fall, they'd come right around and grab it. But I'm telling you, the explosions were incredible. When you have a bait that's moving across the water at a high speed, the fish is moving fast too. And when he hits that lure, it makes quite a splash. I also learned that when you only have 3 lures, you don't get to blame the bait. You adjust your angle, you change your retrieve, you move another 5 yards instead of firing up the big motor and running across the lake. Today I've got more lures than I could use in a lifetime. And every year there's a few new game changers, new colors, new profiles, new sounds, new technology. And yet, I don't think bass have gotten any smarter. I think, if anything, we've just gotten distracted. When you have too many choices, you never stay with one long enough to truly understand it. You don't build confidence. You actually rent it. Back then, I didn't switch lures every 10 minutes because I didn't have the lures to go to. I switched my thinking. I studied the wind. I watched the watercolor. I paid attention to the way bait fish flickered in the shallows. Because when you only have 3 tools, you sharpen them. And here's the truth at 77. It was never about the jitterbug. It was never about the Johnson spoon. And it was never even about the weed wing. It was all about the time on the water. Time teaches you things no video ever will. Time builds instincts electronics can't replace. And time gives you confidence it doesn't shake when the bite gets tough. So maybe the lesson isn't that the old days were better. Maybe it isn't that the old lures were better. Maybe it's that they were simpler. And simple made us better fishermen. If you really want to catch more bass, try this. Put away most of your tackle today. Pick 3 lures. I don't care which 3 it is. Just pick 3 of them. And fish with them until you know exactly what they're doing without looking at them. Fish them in the wind. Fish them in muddy water. Cold fronts. Pre-spawn, post-spawn. Fish them when it's tough conditions, that bluebird sky. But fish them until you can feel the difference, until you know the difference. Because the lure doesn't make the fisherman. The fisherman makes the lure. And time on the water, that's the one thing you can't buy. Thanks for watching, folks.